good, everybody? It's the real AG here with the Lockdown Defense Sports Network. Now, if you caught up with our Hit Squad content last week, you know that we were addressing the biggest headlines and burning questions that need to be answered by each AFC team for 2025. We're kicking this week off under a similar coverage theme. This time around, looking at those biggest headlines and burning questions across the NFC divisions. Today, we're going to be looking at the highly competitive AFC West and addressing those shocking headlines and burning questions for each team in the division. And let's just get things going by kicking it off with the Seattle Seahawks up in the Northwest region. And what's the biggest question that they need to answer this season? To start the analysis, we'll look at kind of the biggest headlines of the preseason or up to this point in camp. First and most important one is the overall status of running back Kenneth Walker III's health. He's been dealing with a foot injury pretty much off and on throughout training camp. He did practice Sunday and is expected to participate in the joint practices this week with Green Bay. So I don't think that his health is an overly alarming thing at this point, because even Coach McDonald has said he has been his usual self when he is healthy and out there in practice. But worth noting nonetheless, because it's never a good sign when your bell cow running back is already dealing with some lingering lower body injuries before the real games even start. So need to note that and kind of monitor that nonetheless. And then, second tone, Mike McDonald did report in his most latest press conference that he believes they're very close to setting the offensive line and wrapping up the ongoing competition that they've had for their starting right guard and center. And, that's a positive thing, because you definitely want that starting five nucleus on your line set as soon as you can, just so you have a good idea. I mean, who your guys are going to be for week one. You can plan around their weaknesses and strengths, and you can just let those five start to build the chemistry that they're going to need to have sustained success, with the unit that they're going to need a lot out of this year. So, those are the biggest headlines in terms of where things are at for Seattle in camp. Looking ahead for the season, what are the questions that they need to answer for 2025? And first and foremost is Sam Darnold, quote, the guy for them? And did they build the right supporting cast around him? So, looking at Darnold, everyone knows they made a splashy move in free agency, signing him to a 3-year, $100.5 million deal with $55 million guaranteed. And they're obviously hoping that he can continue to ascend, after that breakout year he had in Minnesota last season. But I feel like people are just really glossing over the deterring factors from what he did in Minnesota. Looking at Minnesota, first and foremost, I don't think people are giving a whole lot of credit or really truly recognizing just how well of a franchise that they are built in the Vikings, and just how much of this Darnold renaissance probably comes down to that overall structure. Because you look at, a franchise has a great head coach in O'Connell, great QB coaches, just top to bottom from O'Connell down to the staff. They have dynamic receivers. I mean, arguably the best receiver in the NFL right now, and a very reliable offensive line that kept the pocket relatively clean. So that's what Minnesota had to offer. And you just lump in a guy like Darnold, it's hard for someone to be bad with those tools. And then I think people are also just glossing over the Darnold resume as a whole, because let's not forget, outside of 2024, he was essentially given the boot from two franchises that gave him the chance to be their guy in the New York Jets and Panthers. And, he wasn't even set to be the guy for Minnesota last year until J.J. McCarthy, got injured. So, you look at what he's done up to this point and what he did in one season when he had everything going for him, and the fact that he has none of that going into Seattle, it gives a lot of pause for concern, in terms of how this season will go for them. And then that leads right into the second question is, did they build the right supporting cast around him? Because, he does have at least a quality quarterback coach in the new OC they brought over in Clint Kubiak, who, Darnold has familiarity with working with in San Fran. But really outside of that, there's a hell of a lot of burning questions for the offense. I mean, you look at he goes from Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson to arguably really no dynamic wide receiver option. I mean, sure, you got JSN, who's a blossoming star, but he hasn't really been a wide receiver one in his time yet. And then you have Cooper Kupp, who they brought in, hasn't played a full season since 2021. And you got MVS, who's on his fourth year since 23. So, I mean, really not a whole lot to offer in the passing game if who will be catching balls from him. And then on top of that, his new offensive line is a front five that ranks 30th in the NFL and gave up, the second highest pressure rate in 2024 without really adding a whole lot of new pieces to hopefully retool that O-line. So overall verdict with the Seattle Seahawks is, I think we're going to see a lot more of the old Darnold than the Vikings Darnold. I have no faith in the supporting cast around him. And on top of that, I think this offensive line continues to struggle, and we see opposing defenses able to collapse the pocket more, get in Darnold's face, and cause him to start seeing ghosts again. So that is the Seattle Seahawks. Moving on to the LA Rams. What is the biggest question they need to answer for the most recent headlines of the preseason? Biggest ones, obviously, Matt Stafford's health, just the team's health overall, and a recent QB signing that I think is kind of some foreshadowing or writing on the wall of Matt Stafford's overall situation. For Stafford, everyone knows he, has this growing story and just overall mystery of a eluding back problem that's keeping him out of most training camp activities. He has been doing these secret weekend workouts with McVay that sometimes are reported to go really well. Sometimes you hear nothing about. Like last week, McVay gave multiple updates on the throwing session, and then he had another one this past Saturday, and we've heard absolute crickets about it. So, this just the lingering issue with Stafford's back is definitely a concerning thing for the success of this team because, I mean, they go as far as Stafford takes them. So, his ability to stay healthy and perform at a high level is undoubtedly crucial for their success. And then just looking at the team health overall, outside of the Stafford issue, I mean, they have been relatively healthy and just had Emmanuel Forbes, who was dealing with a hamstring issue, recently returned to practice. And then, like I said, a little foreshadowing, because obviously if Stafford's not healthy, LA has a very big QB problem as to who can be number two if they got to go there. Because right now, I mean, before the Bryce Perkins signing, they were looking at having to either start Jimmy G, Stetson Bennett, or Dresser Wynn. And that's just not those are not appealing names for someone that might have to play large chunks of your regular season. And I'm not going to act like Bryce Perkins is a savior signing, but he is a former Ram, current UFL MVP, subtle line there. And, he has played for McVay before, and he has upside in his athletic ability and ability to move through the pocket and run the ball. So, again, I think that's a little bit of a writing on the wall that they are not fully confident in Stafford being available throughout the whole season and, had to bring in someone just to give them a little bit of comfort should that be the case. So, in terms of the burning question for 2025, I think that is this championship window closing? Because everyone knows, the Rams have taken a rather aggressive approach to building what is their version of a championship roster. And, they seem to be one of the teams that goes more for the immediate return rather than the slow burn build. I mean, let's not forget that the phrase F them picks was coined based on how this front office operates. So, their moves have paid off because obviously they got Stafford, got a Super Bowl. But, the question has always been, when will that window close and when will they have to strip this down to the studs and finally rebuild? And, this window is open as long as Stafford and his health will keep it open. And they really have no QB of the future outside of that. So, again, comes down to, can he stay healthy and elite enough for one more shot? Can he build the appropriate chemistry with Devontae Adams to get this offense going? And can the O-line keep him, Stafford or whoever's the QB, upright and healthy enough? And the overall verdict of that is I think no. I think LA's window has officially closed, and they're just only trying to cheat Father Time by, giving us little crumbles of Stafford being healthy enough. I think his overall health status up to this point is alarming. And you look at LA that, went 10-7 last year in a down NFC West and ended up losing to Philly in the divisional round. I don't see them, I don't see Stafford staying healthy enough. I don't see them having the same success in their division that they did as you got these teams emerging or getting healthier. So overall, I think LA is going to have a mediocre year, a decently mediocre year, and is going to be faced with some hard decisions to make at the end of the season. So, moving on to the third NFC West team, the Arizona Cardinals, and what is the biggest question for them in 2025? Looking at their recent headlines, I guess as it could be a headline or biggest headline for any team at this point is just the team health. But as a whole, Arizona's been relatively healthy this preseason with no significant players injured to date. But they do have, offensive tackle Christian Jones suffered a knee injury in week 1. They've had some guys banged up that are sitting out of practice, but nothing, too alarming. And then linebacker BJ Ojulari, who, is recovering from a knee injury, is apparently progressing well. But, head coach Jonathan Gannon has not been ready to really commit if he's going to be full go by week 1. So definitely want to monitor the status of, those young defensive players. And then probably good news for Arizona Cardinals fans, but apparently Trey McBride has just been going scorched earth this preseason and training camp. Most recent news of him just continuing to build with Kyler Murray and grow their connection in the passing game. Like I said, he was reportedly just cooking the Broncos defenders in their joint practices. And I think that's important to note because, it is the Denver defense. They are pretty good. So if that's making its way out of camp, out of a joint practice, he was doing some damage, and you're going to need a big year out of Trey McBride if Arizona and this offense is going to be anything. So good to note that nonetheless. And then, I think other buzz through preseason is, we might see a pretty revamped rushing attack for the Cardinals. All early reports and indications up to this point are that they expect, second-year running back Trey Benson to take a huge step forward and be heavily involved in the offense. You got James Conner in the media calling them both RB1. So, I think just having two viable running backs is an ever-growing trend in this league. Recently made popular by Detroit, but I think we definitely see Arizona implement a similar strategy, and we see Connor's touches reduce and Benson get an uptick, and I think you see him get over 500 yards this year. So it'd be cool to see how that helps the offense, which leads us right into our burning question, as our questions, I should say, is Kyler Murray the guy for Arizona? Can he get the passing game going, and can he turn Marvin Harrison Jr. into a bona fide superstar in the process? So, looking at just the passing game as a whole, it's been pretty much wildly mediocre during Murray's tenure, and 2024 was no different. They were 18th in passing yards at 214 a game and 20th in passing touchdowns, and that's not exactly the statistical pedigree you want when you have a $230 million QB, a top 5 pick at wide receiver, and a star tight end. And, reports through preseason up to this point in training camp is that the attack has been, passing attack has been pretty hit or miss. So, you got to hope. I truly think that this is a make or break year for Kyler Baby Yoda Murray. He's going to have to prove that he can be, just a step in the right direction from what he's put down on tape up to this point. Because it's like I said, can he elevate his play enough to consistently lead this offense, especially in high pressure situations? He has constantly shown flashes of the ability to do that, or to even dominate defenses at times. But he has relatively fallen flat when the lights are shining brightest. And then in turn, like, can he turn Marvin Harrison Jr. into a superstar? He had a decent rookie year, 85 yards and 8 touchdowns, but he only had 200-yard games and did not get over 65 receiving yards once in his last 9 games. So, and he's going to have to do that because they didn't add a whole lot of depth around him. They doubled down on their core wide receiver unit last year and said, we spent the draft capital, go do it. So, we'll see what happens for Marvin Harrison, but the ultimate verdict for is Kyler the guy? I think we do see a breakout season from MHJ, but outside of that, I feel we're going to see a lot of the same out of Kyler Murray in what I said is a make or break year. I mean, like I said, he has not been a consistent QB threat. He hasn't stayed healthy, throughout a season, and he has not shown the ability to consistently elevate his play in high pressure situations. So those are not traits that you want in a QB that you paid a lot of money for and a QB that's supposed to be your franchise guy and to get things right on track. So, like LA, I think Arizona is going to be pressed with some hard decisions to make at the end of this year, both from a coaching staff perspective and just offensive direction moving forward. And to round things out on our burning questions for the NFC West, we're going to look at the San Francisco 49ers and what they need to address in 2025. So looking again at the biggest headlines of preseason up to this point, obviously have injury news that is going to always be the biggest concern for the 49ers, and it's not great news up to this point. I'm sorry, Niners faithful, but just recently as this week 2 preseason game, you got reports that starting right guard Dominic Pooney suffered a knee injury and is expected to miss a good chunk of time. On top of that, you got rookie CJ West and Michael Williams both dealing with knee injuries that were ruled out for that game. And then you got Juwan Jennings with a calf issue, Brandon Ayuk coming back from an ACL MCL tear, on top of safety Mustafa also recovering from a torn ACL. It's not good in terms of the team's health. And then on top of that, Juwan Jennings apparently is in an ongoing money contract dispute with the team while dealing with this injury and was expected to be a hold-in during camp, but for his injury. So that will be interesting to monitor throughout the rest of the preseason and into the regular season here. And then, is a trade in the works because we just saw John Mechie get traded to Philly, and every report after that was that San Francisco was heavily involved in trying to get Mechie as well. So that tells me, they see the writing on the wall with some of their offensive issues right now, and I can expect to see them to maybe add a piece before it's all said and done and we're kicking off, in week 1 of the regular season. So but looking at kind of the biggest question that they'll need to answer, and this may be a similar vein to the Rams a little bit, but ultimately, can the Niners turn it around from last year? And when will the rebuild clock start? So looking at what San Francisco did last season, everyone knows they have need to look back at getting to be the ultra competitive team that they have been after a 6-11 2024 that was pretty much exclusively derailed by injuries. You look at last season, they lost CMC, Trent Williams, Dre Greenlaw, Elijah Mitchell, Brandon Ayuk, Javon Hargrave, Nick Bosa, and their safety Ufunga all suffered injuries that either saw them miss some time or the season entirely. So that's a lot of key contributors to miss. But then, looking at this season, even with some of those guys returning, their defensive unit got hit pretty hard with some of those players departing. Looking at Hargrave, Greenlaw, Charvarius Ward, Ufunga, all left in free agency. So there's a lot of questions on the defensive side of the ball, particularly within their D-line and edge rush unit as what that will look like. And can they hopefully have an improved run defense, which was a hamper to the team last year, and just an overall improved presser package, in third and passing downs. But outside of the defensive concerns and just injury concerns, there's also some serious challenges at who will be catching passes from Purdy. Like I mentioned, you got Ayuk recovering from his knee issue last year with really no clear timetable on coming back. He's actually expected to be on the PUP list to start the season. Debo was traded. Pearsall started the preseason on the PUP list. Juwan Jennings dealing with an injury contract dispute, and Demarcus Robinson, who they brought in free agency, is likely going to get a suspension for a DUI conviction. So it's not really a player in the wide receiver room that doesn't come with some sort of serious question over them with that regarding their long-term status through the season or just overall ability. And then, on top of that, like how much can they get out of CMC as he's in the tail end of his career? So, all those things are sort of the boxes that'll need to be checked to determine if the rebuild clock starts now or if they're kicking the can down the road. But my ultimate verdict on can the Niners turning around is a yes/no verdict, or maybe we're hung right now, because I do think that the 49ers will improve, because let's be real, it's really hard to be worse than they were with the talent that they have and the injuries they dealt with last year. But ultimately, I don't think they turn things around to be the consistent title threat that they've been for the last 4 or 5 years. I think San Francisco, like the Rams, is going to have a decently mediocre year, potentially make the playoffs, and still be left in this somewhat limbo phase, and going to have to make the hard decisions with regard to retooling the roster, moving on from some high-priced, aged-out players, and ultimately what to do with Purdy's new contract extension. So, it's going to be an exciting 2025 for the NFC West altogether, and I'm intrigued to see how each of these teams respond with the moves they've made this offseason, and if these questions are ultimately answered when it's said and done. But that wraps up my review of the shocking headlines for the NFC West and the burning questions each team needs to answer entering the season. As always, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and comment your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to get at me or any of the other Hit Squad members, there's our social information, so come get at us. If you like this video and are looking for more Lockdown Defense content, boom, there it is across all social media platforms. But, in the meantime, please be on the lookout for the rest of our NFC headline coverage for the rest of the week from the Hit Squad. And, I'm the real AG. This is the Lockdown Defense Sports Network, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Peace!